Good everyone. I hope you guys have an amazing day. So today, what I'm going to do, I'll be talking about interesting topic that is how to prepare for a Salesforce developer interview. Now, you must be thinking, "Hey, you already made that video, right?" Yes, I did. That was a year ago. But this in 2022, a lot of things have changed, and Salesforce kind of introduced a few things which I would like to talk with you guys, and I think my response in 2022 will be a bit different compared to what I described back in 2021, right? So the first thing first, right? I mean, as usual, I always say, right? It doesn't matter, you're a Salesforce developer or aspiring to be one, or you have like 3 to 5 years experience. Understanding of a Salesforce platform is very important, right? That's the first thing I always suggest to people who want us to get into Salesforce development space, right? To have a fairly decent understanding about the Salesforce platform. Because in Salesforce, it's not about writing a piece of a code, right? It's about understanding when to write code and when not to write code. Because as you know, right, if you've been following along the Salesforce news around upgrade they're doing on this flows and other low code aspect, the Salesforce is really pushing the low code narrative, right? So if you believe in that, then I would highly emphasize that you guys understand Salesforce platform fairly in a fairly decent way, because um, without knowing, Salesforce platform, what Salesforce tools are out there inside the ecosystem, then you will struggle to, come up with a better solution. Okay. So that being said, let's get started, right? The first thing first, if you're preparing for a Salesforce developer interview, I would highly expect that you guys should have a fairly decent understanding about the Salesforce security system. Okay. Uh, One thing I just wanted to clarify that the things which I'm going to talk about, right, in this video, it's more from a New Zealand Salesforce development market perspective. I don't know how you guys do interview in India, or for that matter in Turkey or in Germany or United States. I do have fairly decent understanding about Australian as well, but it's mostly specific to New Zealand and the things, based on my experience, what normally a person look for in a developer. Okay, uh, again, to me, development interview is not about scrutinizing someone. It's about understanding someone's strength and weakness, right? So if some, I do understand that nobody knows everything, right? Because it's okay when you don't know something. That's fine with me, because like I said, right, when I interview someone, I'm not there to stress on a person's weakness. I'm after finding out what a person is capable of, right? The things that person has worked on before, the things the person is passionate about. That's all I care, right? At the end of the day, for me, it's about two things: the positive attitude and the curiosity to learn things, and of course, the previous experience that does matter. Okay, let's get started. Sorry, I digress. Okay, so like I said, it's very important that you guys should have understanding of the Salesforce security model. What that means is that you should have a fairly decent understanding about when to use profile, when to use permission sets, when to use permission set groups, right? And then the sharing settings is very important. That means that you should have a knowledge about org-wide default, when to use the sharing rules, when to use the manual sharing rules, how to, so let me show you, right? So if I go to sharing settings, um, yeah, it's gonna take a little bit, but I do expect you guys to have an understanding about what do you mean by private, public read write, transfer, right, and control by parent, and also the sharing rules and criteria. I would expect you guys to have a fairly decent understanding, right? And what does the recalculate means, and impact of doing a recalculation. These are platform based questions, right? And so I would emphasize that if you're not comfortable, it's important you guys understand these things, okay? And like I said, sharing rules, manual sharing rules, when to use manual sharing rules, can you do sharing rules in Lightning, right? Okay, that's the basic security aspect, right? Then I would also expect you guys to have a basic understanding about the licensing model, right? The difference between standard license. Okay, let me go to the user, right? Okay, um, because uh, let me go to this one. So, like, what's the user license and impact of user license, and what is role, right? Can a user have more than one role? Can a user have more than one profile? That kind of questions is pretty common, right? Because we expect, if you're a developer, you to have at least a basic understanding of it, right? Because if you tell me, I can create a user without a profile, well, not really good, right? And if you tell me that, a user can have more than one profile, I'm like, really? Can you show me? I mean, if that person can't, then I would really question the knowledge the person has, you know, on Salesforce space. I understand that if you're someone new to Salesforce, coming from a Java background or C# background, aspiring to be a Salesforce developer, that's fairly okay. But I'm talking about someone who claims to have 3 to 4 years experience, right, or even more. Okay, so that's one thing I expect you guys to know, all right? Then uh, I would expect you guys to know how to use Visual Studio Code because obviously you're a developer. You would have used Visual Studio Code because I do understand that Developer Console is a great tool when you wanted to, do some basic stuff like for instance, if you wanted to, do a SQL query, although you can do that using Visual Studio Code as well, but it's okay. I mean, you can do that using, um, the query editor. If you wanted to, run a test class, you can do that. That's all fine, right? But like I said, you can do that using Visual Studio Code as well. I would highly expect and I would highly recommend if you're not confident with Visual Studio Code, please learn how to use the tool, right? It's a fantastic editor. You can do a lot of stuff. You can install a lot of extensions and plugins and, make your life very comfortable, right? I mean, let's accept the fact developer console has been great. I mean, it's doing its job, but right, but for a lot of things, it's not a great tool, right? For instance, you cannot do LWC development using developer console. Okay, right now, like I said, you should have an understanding about the Visual Studio Code. You should know a bit about Devops, right? How to use the Git command because it's very important. Obviously, most of the companies, at least in New Zealand, use version control, right? What that means is that the code gets stored in a repo. When that happens, you obviously have to get the latest code from the repo and push the code back to the repo. And different companies have different branching models, but that's fine. I'm not going to get into that. You don't really have to explain the branching model, but some might ask if I do have some understanding about the branching model. Like you often normally have Scratch org, then you have a UAT, sorry, the sandbox, which is for the QA environment. Then you have a UAT, right? And then you have a production environment. So, which is pretty basic model. It's been followed across New Zealand, but some organizations have mix and match. So, but if some companies also use it's Scratch org, the sandbox for testing and then production, right? Okay. So that's fine, but as long as you know how to use the Git commands like git pull, git push, right? What happens when you experience a merge conflict? If you know how to resolve it, which is very important, then it's pretty sweet in my opinion, right? I'm not expecting you guys to know, full, you know, extensive knowledge about Git, but if you have one, that which is great. Uh, neither someone will ask you if you can create a entire CI/CD pipeline from scratch. Most of the companies have that in place, but if you know that, that's pretty cool. So the knowledge of Git is very important. That being said, most companies use Bitbucket or GitLab or other or Azure, right? Or even AWS. So knowing either one of them will be, would be great. Okay, so that's on the Git side. Now coming to the code side, right, which obviously you must be interested to know. Um, you should have a fairly decent understanding of Apex. When I talk about Apex, not to know how to write if else or those are rubbish, right? Those are basic stuff, which obviously if you're a developer you would know. If not, then I don't consider you as a developer. No offense, but that's if you can't if you don't have an understanding about you know if else or loops, then you're not a developer, right? Then you're trying to be a developer, which is great, but I'm talking about someone who pretends to be a developer, right? So if it comes to me for an interview, say I don't know what loops are about, what if else statement is about, then I'm afraid then you're not ready for a developer job. Okay, so all right. So let's assume you know that stuff. You know all the loops and kind of basic stuff, right? And you should know when to use the collections, right? When to use map, when to use list, when to use sets. Those are pretty basic stuff, right? I do expect you guys to know that, okay? And the limitation of using maps, right? The amount of data we can put into the map, is there any kind of a collection error? And why do we get a collection error? And what stage? The basic stuff, okay? And I do expect you to know solid principle, okay? Because when I interview a developer, I often look for if the person has an understanding of a design pattern, because I don't care what other people say. For me, a well-structured code is very important, right? Otherwise, you are adding a technical depth. And the last thing I want someone to come to the team and add tech depth. That is worse, right? It's rather I'd rather not have someone doing this stuff, right? Because the reason why I'm telling that, because tech debt costs companies a lot of money, right? You may not realize at this stage, but over the course of time, this things adds up. And when this things adds up, it's not a really good look for the company, right? And the company really don't have to suffer because someone is not capable of writing a good code, right? So I would highly encourage you guys to understand solid principle, uh, to see how to write a clean code. If you Uncle Bob, he talked about it a lot, but I have also covered a lot about the solid principle. If you want, you can check out my previous videos, right? So that's very important to me, and you have to know how to write a bulkified version of a code, because in Salesforce we have a concept called bulkified, and obviously you cannot write a code like you used to write in C Sharp or Java, right? It's a little bit different because it's a multi-tenant architecture we'll be dealing with, okay? So there is a resource constraint in place. So that comes to my next question, right? I would really encourage you guys to understand what multi-tenant architecture is about if you're not sure, and because that will help you write better code. Because that's the reason why bulkification is in place, because the resource constraint is in place. It's not like the other one, which is ServiceNow, right? Which is not a multi-tenant, because everything has its own instance, so which is very different compared to Salesforce. Okay, so writing a clean code, which is very important for me, and then I would really encourage you guys to know how to write a better test case. Right, obviously, when you write an Apex code, you need to write a test case, and the test case should contain the positive and the negative scenario, because that will ensure that you're not introducing any bugs to an existing functionality or to a new functionality, right? Okay, so that comes from an Apex side. Okay, now I would encourage one thing, right? You should know when to write an Apex, especially in terms of a trigger, or when to use the flows. Obviously, Salesforce have done a lot of work to push the flow, right? Because you can do all kind of trigger stuff using flow. So you need to know the limitation of using a flow, or the when you can use Apex. I'll give you a very simple scenario, right? I used to work on a project, right? And it was a big project, and the person who wrote the flow before was a functional consultant. And obviously, the flow was shit. I mean, sorry for using the language, the flow was garbage. And it was hitting the limit, and the customers were frustrated because, I'm not going to tell which project is it, because if you guys knew me, you could already figure that out. But the flow was garbage, right? The way it was written, no bulkification whatsoever, no constraint about the high volume data. So when I looked at the flow, I tried to tidy up the flow. It really didn't work. So we end up in migrating to Apex. And the performance improvement was drastic. I mean, drastic to the code. A client really acknowledged that, right? Because, and I was surprised, right? Because people think a low code option means that you can just come in and just start writing stuff. It doesn't work that way, right? Because that's why I prefer flows to be written by a developer rather than a functional person. If a functional consultant has an understanding of how the development stuff works, it's perfectly okay for me, that person doing the job and doing develop flow. But without understanding what loops are, the limitation about reusing certain stuff, or why you shouldn't be reusing it, and how to use a formula field in an efficient way, you cannot write a great flow. And that's one of the things I often test, in an interview, whether a developer have an understanding when to use flow, when not to use flow. Okay, flow fits the purpose for most of the scenario, but that being said, it may not be a great option in certain scenarios. Okay, so that's something you have to keep into consideration if you're going for a developer interview. Okay. All right. And process builders, obviously, Salesforce want to put a kill switch to it. So I won't encourage you guys to know process builder. But in saying so, you might join a company where they have a lot of process builders and you would like to convert the process builders to flow. Okay. So you might need to have a little bit of understanding of process builder to convert that to flow. Okay. So that's the only caveat I would just wanted to mention. Um, Okay, now uh, Salesforce has been pushing a lot in terms of Lightning development. So that means the Salesforce has a model before called Aura development model, and obviously, Aura is an outdated technology, right? Uh, I'm not saying that the Aura is completely dead, but you might work in a company where you might have to migrate a lot of Aura components to LWC. So the knowledge of LWC is highly mandatory, highly required if you're a developer in 2022. Okay, so what that means is that you should have a fairly decent understanding about JavaScript, HTML, and CSS. Okay, and when it comes to JavaScript, you should know how to write, ECMA standard 6 JavaScript, right? Not the old one. You should have an understanding of the arrow functions and other aspects of it. Okay. Um, and also, it would be better if you have some decent understanding of the JavaScript design patterns. There are a few out there, so just go through it. It will help you become a better developer. Okay. Most companies may not ask you those questions, but in my opinion, for your own development, it's very important that you understand this concept, right? So that you can write a better and clean code. Um, so you might be working on a project where they might want you to migrate to from Aura to LWC. So they might query some questions on Aura. So if you have some understanding of Aura, that's fine. But in my case, right, if I interview someone, they say I'm perfectly okay. Someone having an extensive knowledge on Aura and a little bit knowledge on LWC, that's fine. And vice versa, right? If someone having extensive knowledge of LWC and a little bit knowledge of Aura, that's fine as well, right? Visual Force, nobody cares, right? It's a dead technology, right? So that knowledge is primitive, so we can chuck that in the bin, okay? But that being said, some of the components are still written in Visual Force, right? So you might have to write certain things in Visual Force. So having a little bit of knowledge won't hurt, okay? All right. So, and these are the important things when it comes to development, but that's not enough though, right? Because integration forms a big part of the software developer lifecycle, right? You would be doing a lot of integration with external systems, right? Obviously, Salesforce do integrate with a lot of systems like SAP, Workday, other, maybe, you know, HR payroll systems or whatnot. Okay, now integration can be done in different ways, right? Now, you will be obviously as a developer, you might be tempted to write a code. I would not highly encourage using that route. Okay, the reason being there is something called um, external services, which I would highly encourage you to look at it, and you should have an understanding about how the external services works, because you can um, develop your integration without writing a single piece of code, and you can use flows to do this stuff, right? Um, External services will also uh, be capable. So external services is also capable of linking to MuleSoft directly. So that's one of the things you can consider. So knowledge of external service to me is very important because obviously, there are a lot of functionality Salesforce has been offering in different releases. So external service is one of them. And I would highly encourage you guys to check this out. And if you're not sure, I talked about external services in one of my videos. Just have a look at it. It's a part of integration series. Okay. I do understand that there are certain things which you can't do with external services, or maybe an existing integration in place which is not using external services, right? So you might be using a code. So you should have some understanding about what is point-to-point integration means, what is an inbound API, what is an outbound API, what are connected apps, can you use connected apps for APIs, how to expose a Salesforce API to an external provider using connected apps, what is OAuth means, right? What is an OpenID, right? And what is single sign-on? What is a delegated authentication? These things are important in my perspective. I'm not expecting you to be an expert on it, but as a developer, you should have some fairly decent understanding of it, right? At least what is a single sign-on, right? Can you configure a single sign-on, right? So those things, to me, it's important, okay? The reason why I'm saying it's important, right? Because you must be thinking this guy has too many stuff, right? See, the thing is, right? In New Zealand, okay, sometimes most companies don't have a specific job titles, right? You go as a technical consultant, right, or senior technical consultant. They expect, excuse me, they expect you to know the admin part. They expect you to know the architecture side of things. They expect you to know the development side of things. When I used to work as a tech consultant, right, I used to do architecture. I used to get involved in requirement gathering stuff. Integration was the biggest thing, which I used to do, right? And then, solution architecture was a core thing I used to do as well. So, like in New Zealand, right, we have a flat structure in most of the companies, right? Unlike most of the countries where you have that, the model of, whatever that the thing you guys say, in a hierarchical system, right, where you have a developer, a senior developer. Here in New Zealand, you might see a developer who have 20 years experience still have a developer title, right? It's not about the job title, right? I mean, just wanted to make one thing clear, guys. Job title means no shite at the end of the day, right? Because it's all about the kind of work you do and the value you bring to the firm. Because I know for some job title matters, but at the end of the day, you can't pay bills with your job titles, right? You pay bills with the money you make, and the way you make a money base depends upon the value you bring to the firm. The more valuable you are to a company, the more you will be rewarded. That's the way I look at it. And you should have a positive attitude and the curious mindset, right? A developer without curiosity is not a great developer. That's one of the things my mentors told me when I was starting out as a developer. If you don't have a curiosity, then you're not a developer. You're just another code monkey. You just wanted to chuck out the code. Sorry, my apologies if I use this word code monkey. It's a commonly used term in Silicon Valley in most part of the world. It means someone who just write code like a data entry stuff, right? You shouldn't be doing that stuff. You should be passionate about the code, okay? And I do understand that, sometimes you may not be successful in an interview, but that's fine, right? Because, you have a great experience dealing with a company. Sometimes that experience will lead to a better opportunity elsewhere. Okay, that's the way I look at it. Always have a positive attitude. Losing a game or winning a game is not about. It's not about feeling good or bad, right? It's about the lessons you can learn from it. That's the way I look at it, right? Okay. Sorry, I digress. I know I sometimes blabber, so just ignore me on that. Okay, so external service is very important, right? Um, and um, then I might ask you about different frameworks, right? If you work with any frameworks, like Financial Force framework is very commonly used, so most of the companies in New Zealand do use it. So if you haven't worked on it, that's fine, but sometimes you might have to learn that. It's an enterprise framework, and trigger frameworks, right? You should have worked on at least one trigger framework because most of the companies uses trigger framework. So that's something I will really, really query you in. Because to me, when like I said, when I interview someone, right, it's not about scrutinizing someone. For me, I just wanted to understand that person's strength and the things that the person is passionate about, right? I mean, I just prefer that, people who go for interviews should feel comfortable, right? I mean, I don't like, when an interviewer starts scrutinizing, hey, you don't know this. I mean, to me, I have no respect for such interviewers because they're just to show off, right? And I remember I've been interviewed in one of the position and I corrected that person, right? That person was giving me a wrong answer. When I was interviewing at one company, and I said to the person who's interviewing me, your answer is garbage. This is not how it works. I gave the person two, three times, uh, I gave the person different options, right? You can do it this way. I got rejected saying I'm too technical, right? So obviously you don't want it to work for such companies, right? So I'm just saying my perspective, right? It depends from. Anyways, never mind. All right, so that's the first thing. I highly recommend you guys that um, whenever you go for an interview, just feel yourself comfortable, right? Don't worry about the outcome of it, right? Obviously, you're gonna give your best, right? That's all matter at the end of the day. All right. So one thing I would highly encourage you guys to know about the name credentials. Obviously, we're not gonna use the custom metadata or the custom uh, settings for storing the username and password. That's a legacy shit, right? You shouldn't be using that stuff anymore. So you should be using, the name credentials and um, auth providers, right, to configure the security aspect of it. And because for external services, it's very important you guys to have a name credentials. Um, and without name credentials, it's very difficult uh, for you guys to configure an external service. Okay. And I would highly encourage you to check out the external service because it's pretty cool and very powerful when it comes to integration. But if you wanted to see the code side of it, I've done an integration series. Just go through it and pick what you like, right? That's all I can say. Um, Now, you might also hear us, industry cloud, right? It's getting very popular, like Velocity, Omni Studio, right? It used to be called Velocity. Um, it is getting popular, right? In New Zealand, people started to use, but it's not to the extent like unlike other nations. Um, so I think it's okay if you do not know Velocity in 2022, but if you are interviewing in 2023, I would highly encourage you to learn that skill set. It will add lots of value to you, right, when you're applying for a developer job, right? So if you've never heard about Omni Studio, I've done a video, a crash course explaining how the Omni Studio works. Just check it out, right? I explain what are integration procedures, what are data raptors, flex card, you know. It's a pretty short and like 2 hours series. The reason why I calling it a short because I explain pretty much everything, right? You guys, which you guys should know if you wanted to get into Omni Studio, and I try to explain some of the better ways to do things, right? Obviously, when you start with any new tool, right, it's very important to use the tool in the right way, right? Right, rather than just using the tool. So check that out, right? I'm not saying that will be needed this year, but at least for 2023, I would highly recommend, right? Because obviously, if you're watching this video in 2023, my advice would be to learn Omni Studio, right? And if you can learn Health Cloud, that would be better as well, right? Because Salesforce is really doing an aggressive marketing to infiltrate um, the health sector. I mean, infiltrate may not be a polite word, but you know what I mean. So, which is good, if you're a Salesforce professional like I am, and if you're extremely passionate about Salesforce, it's a pretty good thing they're doing, right? They're taking over pretty much most of the industries, which is pretty amazing, right? That means that you will have opportunity to work on the different aspects of the Salesforce, right? Which is fantastic. I'm not going to dwell into CPQ and other aspect, right? That's a different add-on. That's mostly for functional people. But so this is pretty much I wanted to cover when it comes to Salesforce developer preparation. So I'm going to repeat what I've said in a nutshell. So you should have a fairly decent understanding of the platform, right? That means the security aspect, profile, permission set, org-wide default sharing, sharing rules. You should also have some understanding about the login side of things, like the user login, which you will understand when you're dealing with profiles anyways, right? What time a user can log in, can you restrict a user from login, can you deactivate a user, can you freeze a user, right? And also, you know, no, okay, the one thing I forgot, right? You should have a good understanding about the custom object, roll-up summaries, uh, creating custom fields, formula fields, right? Master detail relationship. This is very important. Okay, so master detail relationship, lookup relationship. Why do you need a junction object? That kind of things is very important because obviously you might be involved in a data modeling as a developer. So you need to understand what is a master detail, what is a lookup relationship, and what's the deal with the roll-up summaries, right? And how to use master or use a junction object, that kind of things, right? And you might also need to know about the task and events, right? Because sometimes people ask me, hey, I've created a field, but I can't see that in the task object. So have you looked at the activities, right? So you need to have some understanding of those kind of things, right? It's obviously expected. And validation rules, sometimes, a developer comes to me who's new to Salesforce, hey, I'm trying to save it, but it's giving me a validation error. Why is it? So you need to look at that object validation rule. So that's important for you guys to know, right? And how to create a custom object with proper description and help file. Help text. That's all important, right? That's all driven by the process, what you have in place, right? And one thing which is very important, I missed knowledge about the static code analysis, right? That PMD or Clayton or other tools, which is very important, right? Most of the companies will use PMD. That being said, some of the companies will use other paid tools, right? Like Clayton. Uh, I've tried Clayton, right, when I was working for one of the government agencies, and I highly recommend Clayton, right? Clayton is a pretty amazing tool. But if you don't want to buy a commercial tool, use PMD. It's pretty amazing. Okay. So yeah, and that's pretty much I wanted to cover. I hope that that's been useful. So what I've talked in terms of preparation, right? That's all based on my personal experience and the things what I've done in New Zealand and the people I've interviewed. So, like I said, I've already mentioned, right? I'm not sure about other country interview process, right? I don't know what's going on in India. I don't know what's going on in Turkey. I don't know what's going on in Germany or Switzerland or Denmark or for that matter, United States or Canada, right? I'm just telling based on the requirements we have in New Zealand, based on the things which we do in New Zealand. So the based on the people, based on the interviews we do in New Zealand, right? Um, so interview process varies from company to company. Like some companies will have just one round of technical interview and one round of maybe a behavioral interview. Some companies will have, one round of behavior interview. Behavioral interview is very important in New Zealand because that will decide if a person is really a cultural fit, right? And which is very important, right? I mean, you need to bring in the right people who can work with the team, get along with the team, work as a team, right? After all, it's a team work, right? It's not about individual contribution, though I do agree individual contribution makes a lot of difference, but it's all about working in a team, helping each other as a helping each other within a team, right? Delivering a solution as a team. So when you fail as a team. When you succeed as a team. That's all about it, right? You cannot win the battle alone. You need an ally to win a battle, right? It's very hard to win a battle by going solo. That's why it's important to work in a team, right? Your team might have a different dynamics, right? Some will be a functional guy, some will be a business analyst, some will be tester, some will be developer. So you need to get along with all of your team members, right? And work in harmony, because at the end of the day, your main goal is to serve your customer and develop a better solution so that they can get value out of your product, and in return, customer will reward you with the financial uh, aspect, right? With money or whatever. So yeah, and also please be curious, right? Curiosity is one of the biggest weapon a developer can carry, right? It's the biggest ammo you can have. Curiosity, curious mind. With curious mind, you can conquer any battle any battle you encounter in your developer journey. Have a positive mindset. Be curious about the things that's coming in the Salesforce space, or for that matter, any other tech space, right? Try to innovate, and don't afraid of making mistakes, right? I rather prefer people to make mistakes and learn from it rather than not trying at all. That's very, very bad in my opinion, right? So, like I said, if you fail in a specific development interview, don't worry about it, right? So at least take uh, the things, learn from that experience, right, and try to improve in your next interview. So that's the way I look at it. That's the thing I advise, right? So that being said, I think I blabbered enough, and you might be pretty much bored listening to my blabbering. But my apologies. I didn't really want to be rude, but I just wanted to be honest, because I rather prefer to be honest and direct rather than beating around the bush, right? Because obviously I wanted to put my point across. So I hope you guys have an amazing Sunday. Adios.